So, how many people here have heard of Tinder? How many of you use Tinder? The rest of you are lying, I think. I'm pretty sure. We are lucky to have two people who run product for Tinder, and I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation because this is a very large business that you'd be surprised about, and it's interesting to see how they've actually grown and what they're doing. Why don't you guys talk about yourselves first? Like, how did you get to Tinder, and what do you do at Tinder? Brian, maybe first?
Yeah, so Ankur and I share the head of product role. I'm also the head of revenue. I came through the first acquisition, and the founder of Tinder, Sean Rad, him and I had a business before this, so he's 5 years, I think, younger than me. I call myself his mentor, but he's also my boss.
Got it.
So prior to Tinder, I was the CEO of a company called Human. And at Human, we were spending a lot of time thinking about how do you get people together? How do you provide contextual excuses to get together with your relationships, your contacts in the real world? And early this year, Sean, Brian, and I all reconnected and started thinking about, if you look at the last few years of Tinder, we have transformed the way people match and connect. I mean, over 25 million new connections a day.
Wow.
But what we're thinking about now, which is a problem that we've been thinking a lot about at Human and that Brian and Sean are thinking about at Tinder, was how do we now take those matches and become the place where people connect in the real world, right? Because I think if you look at the landscape, Tinder is the only social network in the world where we're actually introducing new connections, right? Facebook, Snapchat, everything else is about existing relationships. And I think we have the same opportunity when you think about some of the work that we're looking at now to be the only social network that facilitates real world connections, get-togethers, not online connections. And that's kind of why I'm here today.
Got it. So you're not just a hookup app. You are a social connection app.
Yeah, look, it's social planning. There's a lot of opportunities. People love to get together. I mean, everyone is here in Helsinki to meet in person.
Right. Well, let's step back a little bit. I want to hear from Brian the scale of this business. You guys are owned by Match.com, which is a public company, right?
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about how big it is, and then we'll get to more on the actual details of the business.
So we've kicked off monetization a little less than 2 years ago. So we're a top 10 grossing app overall. If you look in that category, you see mostly huge names, the Netflix, Clash of Clans. We're up there. The business is phenomenal. But I think the reason why the business is phenomenal is our customer experience is so effortless, so fluid. It's the ease of use of the app that actually fuels the business behind it. And a lot of people don't even sort of realize that we're monetizing on Tinder. And that's actually, I think, a good thing. It's very subtle, but Tinder Plus is our premium product. And it's done, we call it Superpowers. You subscribe to Tinder Plus and you can do a lot of cool things. You can move around the world, you get extra super likes. And I think one of the things that's really sort of mesmerizing is the scale of Tinder right now is it's off the charts. And I think it's, again, a function of great product.
So one fun little fact on the superpowers of Tinder Plus. So how many of you guys know what Passport is on Tinder? Have you guys tried this feature out? Okay.
One guy.
So one of the cool things you can
Someone
do
over
on
there.
Tinder, one of the cool things you can do with Tinder is you can actually passport your location to another city in the world to start swiping with people before you arrive. Fun little fact is that the Nordic countries are the most visited city through Tinder's Passport, and I think it's no surprise. People love meeting Nordic.
So you don't have to actually travel there. You can just passport there and just play around and see what's going on.
Start creating connections.
Yeah. Did you guys do that before coming here to Helsinki?
I did not, but I probably should have.
So you've got this, big business. It's hard to keep growing a business, right? So what are your guys' jobs to keep this thing growing? Like it's once you get to this kind of scale, like I work, do a lot of investments, and it's amazing to see like companies that, they get to 1 million, 5 million users, and it's these numbers are huge, but then they hit a wall at some point. They're really like, what do we do next? And it's like, do you become, do you do paid marketing? Do you do growth hacking? There's all these things that, these buzzwords everyone out there trying to do. It's hard to keep growing. So tell me what you guys do to keep the growth happening.
The interesting thing about Tinder as a brand is different parts of the world are just lighting up. And you've seen obviously markets, US, UK, very mature markets, but you look at Brazil, for example, just absolutely lighting up. So we don't do a ton of customer acquisition. The DNA of Tinder has always started with build great, fluid, simple product first. Great product will get word of mouth going, and word of mouth equals downloads and people talking about it and going to the app store or sharing with friends. And we've never deviated. 5 years in, we still think every day. We don't wake up going, how do we acquire a customer? We say, how do we make this product so addicting and so fun that someone will tell their friend? And we talk about the wrist twist. You want people to take Tinder, take their phone and twist their wrist and say, look at this.
Yep.
And that's how we build every product at Tinder.
So we're in a very interesting time right now at Tinder. Right? We are the world's largest mobile dating company. But if you think about it, the question really isn't how do you necessarily continue to just stay in that business, it's how do you expand what we do as a company. So if you look at Snapchat 3 years ago, people forget, Snapchat just 3 years ago was just disappearing photos.
Yeah.
In fact, it was
stories.
Nothing.
No
In
news.
fact, it was almost embarrassing if you got caught at the office with Snapchat, right? The thing that Evan did so well is that despite a strong brand association, they incrementally evolved the product to continue solving those core problems that users faced until literally 3 years later, they're now a $25 billion media company.
Right.
And so at Tinder, Brian and I ask ourselves this question a lot, which is, today we're a multi-billion-dollar dating business. But where does that go? What happens when you have 25 million connections happening every single day?
And you put 100 people in a room, there's 100 different answers of why they're on Tinder.
Right.
And that is the most sort of interesting part of the problem.
Yeah.
But does it keep you awake at night thinking about at some point your growth might flatten out or even go down? Is that ever get you worried at all?
No. Our focus, like Brian said, is always what is it the user wants, right? And we are in such a unique position in how many individual people around the world turn to Tinder to meet new people, that life cycle of meeting people, getting together, connecting, that drives so much of the economy worldwide, that to think that we're even close to scratching the surface of the opportunity would be crazy.
So they bought your company, 6-9 months ago, right?
Yeah.
And they bought your company too, so that's 2 acquisitions.
Yes.
I think it's only 2 acquisitions they've done.
Yes.
Clearly those were thinking about growth and expanding the product. And you just mentioned Snapchat, how they've evolved. So any little insight of where you guys are going to evolve to? You talk about being a social networking app, but give me a little more detail you think where you can evolve so that you aren't just a dating app.
So I'll give a quick high level and then let Brian jump in. So we think of phase 1 of Tinder as how do we drive connections between people? How do we remove the awkwardness of having to approach a stranger? How do we remove the feeling of rejection? And that simple product experience that revolutionized that model. I think for phase 2, again, it's how do you now take those connections and turn them into real world meetups? And I think one of the cool things that Brian and I talk about is that every other social app measures success by time spent in app. For us, we measure success by time spent together in the real world.
Interesting.
And I also think if you look at Ankur's idea of sort of phases, meeting new people is a huge, huge, huge problem.
Yeah.
And we could be solving this for the next 10 years, 20 years. This is never going to change. New generations come in. And I think about Tinder and I say to myself, Ankur mentions the double opt-in, something very simple of I like you, you like me, we can talk. That is now pervasive across tons of different apps, tons of different models. And I would like to say we sort of popularized that, maybe we didn't invent it. We have a lot of room with this problem. It's so big, so massive, and that's one of the sort of awesome things about Tinder. It's every day we wake up enthused, we say to ourselves, holy crap, the size of this problem It's as big as literally the entire DAU of the internet.
Right. Do you get inspiration by competing companies or like companies that are doing similar kind of apps, or just out in the app world? Like, how do you guys think about like where you want to take it? Like, where does your inspiration come from?
Right. There's a great quote from Jack Ma where he talks about the biggest mistakes companies like eBay made when they entered China. Right. He said eBay was so worried about what their competitors did that they forgot what the customers want. And for us, every day we ask ourselves, what does the customer want? What is the experience that's missing? Where's the friction and how can we remove it? And I think if there was something that our competitors are doing that our customers want, they'll tell us.
Right.
And so our focus is just undying focus of asking people what they want and how they use our product. And by definition, I think we'll have solved any problems with the competitors.
Yeah, I would say like we've always had a lot of courage, a lot of fortitude, and just said, we believe in our instincts about our customer, we believe in our customer. We don't wake up saying, what is our competitor doing today? And I think that if you want to innovate, you have to lead from the front. That takes a lot of courage, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's a little sort of, you feel alienated. But like we've always led from the front. And I can remember even in the early days when people said, oh, you're going to swipe left and right in a photo, that's it? That's it? That's the app? And look where we are today. So, but I will give a little shout out. I mean, Snapchat has done some amazing things. We really respect them. They're also in Los Angeles. But in general, I think every day, as Ankur said, we wake up and say, what does our customer want?
Right.
And I just, it's particularly interesting. As a business, we look at the dating market as, again, much broader than just the like singles connecting, right? It's this whole experience of getting together, meeting up, connecting, et cetera. And I think they're really in that landscape. It's such a new area where technology's penetrating that space. There's such a there is no real competitive pressure that we're feeling there, and so.
But to sort of bridge on that comment, we don't even think of this as a dating market per se. We think of this as people, humans. People want to meet. Some people meet for coffee. Some people want a wife. Some people want someone to show them around Helsinki. So this isn't like verticalized. And like I think what was the beauty of Tinder is we came in saying we're not about purely dating, and that was actually the competitive advantage.
So I guess I'll just say one thing here because before we're out of time, which is that a lot of people in the audience here are startup founders at a much earlier stage than us at Tinder. And just 8 months ago, I was fighting that startup battle. Just 2 years ago, Brian was facing that startup battle. And there's a couple things I've learned now being on both sides that I think are potentially valuable takeaways. When you're a startup, you're fighting to get people to be aware of your brand. At Tinder, we're not spending our time on things like brand awareness. We're spending our time on expanding the use case and building new product experiences, and we can test fast. I mean, it's so easy for us to launch a product and test really fast and see what works. You don't have that freedom and liberty as a startup. And so when you look at why Tinder succeeded, why are other startups struggling to take off, I think the lesson that I've learned is if you focus on taking core human behaviors and reducing the friction and simplifying it, word of mouth will naturally carry your product much faster than what a lot of entrepreneurs, including us in our early days of our companies, did, which was try to create a problem that your solution can solve. Right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you think, well, if we could just do this, how cool would that be? But the reality is human behavior hasn't changed much over the hundreds of years, right? Thousands of years. And so when you look at the most successful technology, particularly in the consumer space, they are taking like those same human behaviors and adapting it with a new emerging technology platform, right? And in Tinder's case, that happened to be mobile. But 10 years ago, there was a different version of Tinder, right? And 10 years before that, there was a different version of Tinder.
Right.
And so just keep them thinking about that. Like, what is the emerging technology platform?
And the greatest accelerator in all of business is word of mouth.
Yeah,
If
always.
you can get people talking, everything will follow.
Yeah. So both you guys came from startups that you didn't get to nearly the scale, obviously, as Tinder, so we went there. And now it's a public company. So Brian, you were there, probably the transformation from being a private company into a public company.
Sure.
Did the pressures change?
You know what, obviously things change, but I would say for the better. We become a more organized company, more formulaic in how we produce product, how we think about customers. And so the transition for us hasn't been it hasn't been rocky. It's actually been very good. I think the only difference today now is we have just a huge responsibility. There was the time when we thought, oh, okay, the app went down, like, oh, let's fix it. Now it's code red, 25 people are up with, they're flown on all night. Like, it's just a different world, but it's actually helped the company.
Good. So I think the topic of this discussion is supposed to be on growth. Sure. And we've talked a little bit about it, but I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of advice would you give? You gave a little bit there before for startups just starting, like how they should think about growth. Like, how do they think about getting beyond these ceilings you hit? I've seen it every time that these companies, they hit like whatever it be, 500,000 or 5 million, and they got to get beyond that stage of growth. And sometimes it requires money, sometimes it requires the right people. Do you have any kind of advice from what your experience has been like for a startup, what they should do to really keep growing?
Just to repeat what Brian said a second ago, I think this is really fascinating. Tinder has spent almost no money on customer acquisition or marketing campaigns. And I say that because the amount of startups that we see that raise tremendous amounts of venture capital because they think that's the money they need to go pay for customer acquisition, advertising, traditional media, campaigns, etc. It doesn't work, right? And so I think, especially at the startup stage, all the efforts, all the dollars should be spent on product market fit first, which is something that a lot of entrepreneurs think they've achieved before they've actually achieved.
Right.
And I think once you reach product market fit, the question then becomes, why do you as a user care to share this experience with your friends? Whether, with Uber, there was that magical moment when you had the product and you first invited the two of us to get in the car with you. Mm-hmm. With Tinder, it was the first time you let your friends swipe on the photos with you and share that experience, because it was magic. It was a novelty factor, it was a word of mouth factor. And so, again, if you take an existing behavior, model it to a platform, that might help you get product market fit, but then you got to be creative in thinking about what is that novelty. And for us, it was the swipe right, swipe left, right?
Yeah, so I think, you're hitting on something. I even go back a step, which is, I don't even know, what is growth? It's an abstract idea. Like, as Ankur, you could buy customers, you could put up billboards, you could do radio campaigns. I don't really understand it. I think what we're getting at, successful companies and successful people have a point of view. And I think Tinder, is obviously an artifact of a point of view. We realized that people didn't want the pressure, they didn't want the pain, they didn't want to fill out 50 different forms about how tall they were, what their religion is. And I think that started with an idea, a point of view, like something that was potentially controversial, but it was something that was unique to us. And I think a lot of companies jump into markets and they say, well, I like this part of this company and that part of this company, and they try to merge them together. And what you have is something that's not unique. And you can smell it, you can see it, you can feel it. And so what I would say to every entrepreneur in the room is be courageous and have a vision and have a point of view, like stand out from the crowd and try. Because you know what? The worst you can do is fail and you can start again.
Perfect. And I think our time is up.
Thank you.
That was a very good ending. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We'll take a little picture.